Manuel, step out of the booth for us and keep your hands clear.
I'm in the middle of a lane. Do you need me to close it?
Once is a mistake. Twice is suspicious. Manuel Perez Jr. did this more than 250 times across 5 years at one of the busiest border crossings in the United States. And he got paid over $700,000 to do it.
Another officer is taking over. This is about vehicles cleared through your lane.
Which vehicles are you talking about?
He would not get the chance to explain. Within hours, federal agents from the FBI El Paso, West Texas Border Corruption Task Force would be inside his apartment, photographing the Rolex on his dresser, the cash in his closet, and the black leather massage chair he had paid for in untraceable bills. 5 years of conduct, more than 250 undocumented migrants, 32 kilograms of cocaine, $700,000 in bribes, and one gray Nissan Pathfinder that had rolled through his inspection lane 5 separate times in 11 months, carrying a different driver each time, and Manuel Perez Jr. had waved every single one of them through. Fair warning before we go any further. This case gets uglier the deeper you go into it. A man in a federal uniform sold the front door of the United States, one vehicle at a time, and it took 5 years before anyone in the architecture above him caught on. If this story makes you angry, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. And if you're not subscribed yet, hit subscribe. The full picture is worse than the headline. Manuel Perez Jr. was born in 1993 in El Paso, Texas, the youngest of 3 children in a working-class household in the city's central neighborhoods, about 2 miles north of the Rio Grande and the international bridge that would eventually define his career, his crimes, and the next decade of his life behind bars. His father worked maintenance for the El Paso Independent School District. His mother cleaned offices in the downtown core, sometimes pulling double shifts in buildings within walking distance of the federal courthouse, where her son would one day stand for sentencing. The family lived in a small stucco house with a chain-link fence and a swamp cooler bolted to the roof. Manuel grew up bilingual, switching between English and Spanish without thinking about it, the way most kids do in El Paso. He played Little League at Memorial Park. He rode his bike across the city. He saw the border every day of his life. The bridge into Ciudad Juarez was not an abstraction. It was the horizon at the end of his street. He attended Bowie High School, graduated in 2011 with average grades, and worked for 2 years at a tire shop on Alameda Avenue while taking general studies courses at El Paso Community College. Co-workers described him as quiet, reliable, willing to stay late. The owner of the tire shop later told a federal investigator that Manuel had been the kind of employee who never asked for a raise and never called in sick. That detail stuck with the owner. He repeated it twice. In 2014, at the age of 21, Manuel applied to U.S. Customs and Border Protection. He passed the written exam. He passed the polygraph. He passed the background investigation. He attended the CBP Field Operations Academy at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Glencoe, Georgia, completing the 18-week course in customs law, immigration law, firearms qualification, defensive tactics, and the architectural framework of a primary inspection booth at a land port of entry. His academy evaluators wrote that he was attentive, bilingual, comfortable with public-facing interactions, and well-suited to a high-volume port environment. One evaluator added, almost as a footnote, that Manuel had deep familiarity with the El Paso and Juarez border culture and would integrate quickly into a Texas land port assignment. It was meant as a compliment. In hindsight, the federal prosecutor would call it a warning that no one read. He was sworn in at a ceremony in Glencoe in 2015. His mother flew out. His father did not. Manuel posted the photographs on social media. Badge, dress blues, the federal seal behind him. He was 22 years old, and he was a Customs and Border Protection officer assigned to the Paso Del Norte port of entry in downtown El Paso, the same bridge he had grown up looking at from the end of his street. For the first 4 years, by every available record, Manuel Perez Jr. did the job. He showed up on time. He cleared vehicles. He passed his recurring integrity checks. He received standard performance reviews describing him as consistently meeting expectations, demonstrating initiative, working well within lane clearance protocols. He took the overtime when it was offered. He sent money home to his mother. He bought a used Chevy Silverado in 2017 and paid it off in 2 years. Then something changed. The official record does not capture the exact moment, but federal investigators would later place it sometime in the late fall of 2019. Manuel Perez Jr. had been a CBP officer for 4 years. He was 26 years old, and someone, somewhere on the Juarez side of the bridge, made him an offer. To understand what Manuel Perez Jr. did, you have to understand the architecture he was sitting inside. The Paso del Norte port of entry is one of the busiest land ports of entry on the southern border of the United States. It sits at the foot of Stanton Street in downtown El Paso, spanning the Rio Grande into the Mexican city of Ciudad Juarez. On a normal weekday, tens of thousands of vehicles and pedestrians cross northbound through the port. Commuters going to work, students going to class, tourists, truckers, families, and, every single day, a small number of people trying to enter the United States illegally, hidden in trunks, false compartments, sleeper cabs, and back seats. The architecture that decides who comes in and who does not is concentrated in a single human being. The CBP officer assigned to a primary inspection lane. That officer sits inside a booth roughly the size of a phone booth, with a sliding glass window facing the driver, a computer terminal running the TECS database, a license plate reader, a radio, a sidearm, and a credentialed federal badge. Every vehicle that enters the United States through that lane passes through that officer's individual judgment. The officer asks the questions: citizenship, purpose of travel, length of stay. The officer scans the documents: passport, border crossing card, visa. The officer looks at the driver. The officer looks at the passengers. The officer looks at the vehicle. And then the officer makes one of two decisions: clear the vehicle into the United States, or send it to secondary inspection for a deeper search. For the overwhelming majority of crossings, that decision is final. There is no second officer reviewing the call. There is no supervisor watching the screen. There is no automated check that flags every clearance. The system depends on the officer being honest. The institutional check on a bad actor officer is supposed to come from somewhere else entirely. The CBP Office of Professional Responsibility runs internal integrity investigations. The Department of Homeland Security Office of Inspector General audits patterns and tips. The FBI Border Corruption Task Force, run out of the El Paso field office under the broader West Texas Initiative, investigates federal officers suspected of taking money from cartels and smuggling networks. And the United States Attorney's Office for the Western District of Texas prosecutes the cases that survive. But all of those checks are downstream. They come after the conduct has already happened. They depend on someone, somewhere, noticing a pattern, an anomaly in clearance data, a tip from an informant, a wiretap on the Mexican side that catches a name, a flipped co-conspirator who decides to talk. In the meantime, the officer in the booth has discretion. And discretion, when it is sold, is the most valuable commodity at any land port of entry in the United States. Manuel Perez Jr. sat in that booth for 10 years. For the first 4, he sold nothing. For the next 5, he sold every vehicle he could. The first payment, according to what Perez himself would later tell investigators, was $2,500 in cash, handed off in the parking lot of a restaurant on the El Paso side of the river, by a man Perez had grown up around, but had not seen in years. The terms were simple. A vehicle would approach Perez's lane at a specific time on a specific day. The vehicle would be carrying one undocumented migrant. Perez would not look too closely at the documents. He would not look too closely at the passenger. He would clear the vehicle into the United States, and the cash would arrive within the week. The first vehicle came in November of 2019. Perez waved it through. The cash arrived 3 days later, in an envelope left in the glove compartment of his Silverado while it sat in his apartment building's parking lot. Nothing happened. No alarm. No supervisor. No call from CBP-OPR. The vehicle had cleared. The migrant had entered. Perez had $2,500 in cash he had not earned at the booth. Therefore, he did it again. The rate held steady across the conduct window. $2,500 per undocumented migrant cleared through his lane. The architecture was clean. The smugglers on the Juarez side organized the load. They knew when Perez was working and which lane he was assigned to. They timed the crossing. They prepped the driver. They handled the bribe afterward. All Perez had to do was sit in the booth, ask the script of questions, and slide the window shut on the clearance. The numbers escalated. 1 migrant per crossing became 2. 2 became 3. Federal investigators would later determine that across the full 5.25-year conduct window, Manuel Perez Jr. helped smuggle more than 250 undocumented migrants into the United States through his specific inspection lane at the Paso Del Norte Bridge. And then the smugglers offered him something else: cocaine. The same vehicles that were running migrants north were also running narcotics. Perez was already clearing the vehicles. The smugglers wanted to know if he would clear them with kilos in the panels. The answer was yes. From November of 2019 through February of 2025, Manuel Perez Jr. conspired to possess with intent to distribute at least 5 kilograms of cocaine. The aggregate quantity across the conduct window exceeded 32 kilograms, distributed by the broader network throughout Texas, Louisiana, and the eastern seaboard, with confirmed loads landing as far away as North Carolina. The cash kept arriving. By the federal count, more than $700,000 in bribe payments crossed into Perez's hands across the 5 years. The cash itself was a problem. He could not deposit it. He could not explain it. So he spent it the way people spend money they cannot explain. He bought a Rolex. He bought jewelry for women he was seeing. He bought a black leather massage chair that he installed in the living room of his apartment. He kept stacks of currency in a closet behind his uniforms. The signs were there. A CBP officer on a federal salary, living alone, suddenly wearing a watch worth $12,000 to off-duty bar nights with co-workers. Buying rounds, picking up tabs, paying cash for everything. A colleague would later tell investigators that he had assumed Perez had inherited money from a relative. Another assumed it was a girlfriend with a successful business. Nobody asked. Nobody filed an internal report. Nobody escalated to CBP-OPR. The lane clearance records on Perez's specific booth showed nothing alarming because the system was not designed to flag a high clearance rate. A CBP officer who clears a lot of vehicles is doing his job efficiently. That is what the metric rewards. And then, in late December of 2023, a gray Nissan Pathfinder approached Perez's lane for the first time. December 21st. 2023, 2 days before Christmas. The northbound lanes at the Paso Del Norte Bridge were heavy with holiday traffic, with shoppers, with families crossing to visit relatives on the El Paso side. The gray Nissan Pathfinder rolled forward in the queue. Perez was working primary inspection in lane 4. The vehicle reached his window. The driver, federal investigators would later establish, was an undocumented migrant who had paid $16,000 to a co-conspirator of Perez's to be smuggled into the United States. $16,000. $2,500 of that, by the architecture of the scheme, was earmarked for the man in the booth. Perez asked the questions. Perez looked at the documents. Perez looked at the driver. Perez cleared the vehicle. The Pathfinder entered the United States. The cash arrived later that week. 40 days later, in late January of 2024, the same gray Nissan Pathfinder approached Perez's lane again. Different driver, same vehicle, same license plate. Perez cleared it. May of 2024. The gray Nissan Pathfinder came back. A third driver, undocumented. Perez cleared it. August of 2024. Fourth crossing. Same vehicle, same outcome. November of 2024. Fifth crossing. This time, 3 undocumented migrants in the vehicle. Perez cleared all of them. The same gray Nissan Pathfinder. the same primary inspection lane, the same officer, 5 separate clearance events spread across 11 months, 5 different sets of undocumented passengers. And not once did the CBP Office of Professional Responsibility's anomaly detection cycle surface the pattern in real time. Not once did a supervisor pull the clearance log for Lane 4 and notice that a single Mexico-plated SUV had cleared the same officer's booth 5 times in a year. The vehicle was a ghost in the system. Or rather, it was a ghost the system was not looking for. But somewhere else, in a different building, in a different agency, somebody was finally looking. The FBI El Paso, West Texas Border Corruption Task Force had been working a broader investigation into transnational smuggling routes running through the El Paso and Juarez corridor for more than a year. The investigation had started with an informant on the Mexican side. It had grown through wiretaps, controlled deliveries, and surveillance of mid-level coordinators in Ciudad Juarez. And by the late fall of 2024, the task force had a name. The name had a badge number. The badge number was assigned to a primary inspection lane at the Paso Del Norte Bridge. The investigation pivoted. The FBI El Paso West Texas Border Corruption Task Force, working jointly with the CBP Office of Professional Responsibility and the DHS Office of Inspector General, opened a federal corruption case file on Manuel Perez Jr. in the final weeks of 2024. The first step was the records pull. Investigators requested every lane clearance log for every shift Perez had worked at the Paso del Norte port of entry across the prior 3 years. The data set was enormous. Tens of thousands of individual vehicle clearances. The investigators ran the data through a custom pattern analysis tool designed to identify license plates that had cleared the same officer's lane an anomalously high number of times. The gray Nissan Pathfinder surfaced inside an hour. 5 separate clearance events. December 2023, January 2024, May 2024, August 2024, November 2024. Same plate, same lane, same officer. And when investigators pulled the CBP secondary inspection records for the same plate at the same port, the vehicle had never once been referred to secondary. It had cleared Perez's booth 5 out of 5 times without a single deeper look. The smoking gun was the same vehicle, 5 times, in one officer's lane. The task force escalated. A federal wire intercept was authorized on phone numbers associated with the broader smuggling network. The intercepts captured conversations that referenced the guy at the bridge, timing requests for crossings, payment confirmations, and one conversation in which a coordinator complained that Manny was raising his rate. Surveillance teams photographed Perez at restaurants on the El Paso side, meeting with men later identified as mid-level coordinators in the smuggling pipeline. Financial subpoenas pulled Perez's bank records, his credit card statements, and his apartment lease. The record showed a federal officer earning roughly $75,000 a year, living a lifestyle that did not reconcile to the salary. A search warrant was drafted for Perez's apartment. The warrant authorized the seizure of currency, jewelry, electronics, watches, and any documentary evidence of the bribery, drug trafficking, and human smuggling conspiracies. A separate warrant authorized the seizure of his phone, his vehicle, and the contents of any safe or lockbox on the premises. The task force chose the date carefully. The arrest would happen at the bridge, at his post, at the booth. Federal agents wanted the arrest to be made at the architectural seat of the betrayal. They wanted the body cam to capture the moment a credentialed CBP officer in full uniform was taken into federal custody from the inspection lane he had been selling for 5 years. The date they chose was February 5th, 2025. We're heading into the arrest in the courtroom next. If accountability content like this is what you came here for, hit subscribe and stick around. These federal corruption cases don't get the coverage they deserve in mainstream news, and we cover one every single week. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. The verdict on this one will tell you everything about how the system treats a uniform that gets sold. The morning of February 5th, 2025, was cold by El Paso standards. Mid-40s at sunrise. A thin layer of frost on the windshields in the long-term lot. Manuel Perez Jr. arrived at the Paso del Norte port of entry at 6:15 a.m., parked in the employee section, walked into the briefing room, and took his lane assignment. Lane 4. The same lane he had worked for most of the prior 5 years. He passed through the officer entrance. He clocked in. He picked up his radio. He logged into the TECS terminal at the booth. He poured a cup of coffee from the break room thermos. And at 7:03 a.m., the first vehicle of his shift rolled forward in the queue. He cleared 3 vehicles. A pickup with a commuter, a sedan with a family, a delivery van with paperwork. At 7:11 a.m., a black Chevrolet Tahoe with federal plates pulled into the staging area adjacent to Lane 4. 2 men in suits and tactical vests stepped out. A second vehicle pulled in behind. 2 more agents. A CBP supervisor in dress uniform walked toward Perez's booth from the inspection plaza side. Perez saw the supervisor first. He slid the booth window open. "Officer Perez, step out of the lane, please." Perez did not move immediately. He looked at the 2 federal agents now visible to his left. He looked at the supervisor. He looked back at the screen on the TECS terminal. "What's going on? Step out of the lane, officer. Now." He stepped out. The booth door closed behind him. The agents identified themselves as FBI and CBP-OPR. They informed him that he was under arrest on a federal warrant for conspiracy to distribute cocaine, conspiracy to bring undocumented aliens into the United States for financial gain, and bribery of a public official. Perez did not resist. He did not argue. He looked at the supervisor, who did not look back at him. He looked at his own boots. He said one sentence in a voice that the body cam audio later picked up clearly. "I want a lawyer." That was it. He said nothing else. Not in the staging area, not in the back of the federal vehicle, not at the FBI El Paso field office during the booking, not at the initial appearance later that afternoon in front of a federal magistrate. The man who had spent 5 years selling a federal inspection lane to a transnational smuggling network had 4 words to say about it when the federal government finally arrived to collect. Manuel Perez Jr. was indicted by a federal grand jury in the Western District of Texas on 9 separate counts. Conspiracy to possess with intent to distribute 5 kilograms or more of cocaine. Conspiracy to bring undocumented aliens into the United States for financial gain. Bribery of a public official, and 6 related substantive counts covering specific clearance events, specific bribe payments, and specific drug deliveries across the conduct window. The case was assigned to United States District Judge Kathleen Cardone in the El Paso Federal Courthouse. Assistant United States Attorney John Johnston led the prosecution. Perez was detained without bail after the detention hearing, at which a CBP-OPR special agent testified, on the record, that Perez had told investigators he had been paid $2,500 for each undocumented migrant cleared through his lane. That single sentence, on the public record, established the architecture of the scheme in language a jury would have understood in under a minute. On October 9, 2025, 8 months after his arrest, Perez entered a plea of guilty to 3 of the 9 counts: the drug conspiracy count, the human smuggling conspiracy count, the bribery count. As part of the plea agreement, the remaining 6 counts were dismissed. The plea did not include a cooperation provision. Perez was not flipping on the broader network. He was taking the deal. Sentencing was set for March 2, 2026. The courtroom that morning was full. Federal agents from the FBI El Paso field office, CBP supervisors in dress uniform, CBP-OPR investigators, DHS-OIG personnel, reporters from the El Paso Times and the regional news services, and, in the front row on the defense side, Perez's mother, who had flown to Glencoe 11 years earlier to watch her son receive his federal badge. The government's sentencing memorandum laid out the architecture in cold federal prose. More than 250 undocumented migrants smuggled into the United States. More than 32 kilograms of cocaine distributed across Texas, Louisiana, and North Carolina. more than $700,000 in bribes received, the Rolex, the jewelry, the black leather massage chair, the serial clearance pattern on the gray Nissan Pathfinder, 5 times in 11 months, same vehicle, same lane, same officer. Judge Cardone addressed the defendant directly before pronouncing sentence. She spoke for several minutes. The portion of her remarks that the El Paso Times printed in the following morning's edition was the portion that stuck. You did not stumble into this. You did not make a single mistake under pressure. You sat in that booth for more than 5 years, and you sold the badge of the United States of America, one vehicle at a time, to a transnational criminal network. You betrayed the country you swore to defend. You tarnished the badge that the officers sitting in this courtroom wear with honor. And you did it for cash, for a watch, and for a massage chair. She imposed the sentence. 120 months on the drug conspiracy count, 120 months on the bribery count, 60 months on the human smuggling conspiracy count. All 3 sentences to run concurrently. Total time, 10 years in federal prison, followed by 11 years of supervised release. Plus forfeiture of the black massage chair, the jewelry, the Rolex, $3,880 in seized currency, and a $200,000 money judgment representing the value of the proceeds obtained. Manuel Perez Jr. will serve his sentence at a federal medical facility designated by the Bureau of Prisons to accommodate his medical needs. He will be in his early 40s when he is released. The federal supervised release period will follow him into his early 50s. The gray Nissan Pathfinder, the vehicle that finally surfaced him, was last documented in federal evidentiary records as impounded. The driver of the November 2024 crossing, the one with the 3 undocumented migrants, was deported. The badge number assigned to Lane 4 at the Paso Del Norte port of entry was reissued to a different officer within 90 days of the arrest. The lane reopened. The traffic kept coming. And somewhere in the architecture of the FBI El Paso, West Texas Border Corruption Task Force, the case file on Manuel Perez Jr. moved from active to closed, and a new file opened on the next officer. That case was infuriating, but the one on your screen right now is somehow worse. Click it.